Real families, real farms, real food. Welcome to Arizona Agriculture Connection with Maricopa County Farm Bureau. My name is Nicole Clements, Executive Director, and I'll be your host. Maricopa County Farm Bureau is the voice of agriculture in a community that thrives on the dichotomy of urban and rural agriculture operations. This podcast is a home for farmers, ranchers, food lovers, prospective agriculturalists, and those looking to connect the food on their plate with the farm that it came from. As we take an inside look at agriculture in Arizona, we will delve into topics like ag technology, policy, food preparation, and everything in between. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform with new episodes every Wednesday. Arizona Agriculture Connection is hosted by Maricopa County Farm Bureau and sponsored by Paloma Ready Mix and Materials, a proud supporter of agriculture and our communities. Be sure to subscribe and share your favorite episodes with your friends. For more interactions, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Maricopa County FB. Now let's discover some Arizona agriculture. All right, welcome back, Arizona Aggies, to another edition of Arizona Agriculture Connection in our Careers in Ag series. So this week, I'm really excited to have our friend Ben Saylor here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So Ben is a dairy nutritionist, which you might be thinking, why do cows need a dietitian? Well, we're going to tell you about it. So thanks for being here. Why don't you share a little bit about your background, kind of how you grew up and how you got to this position?
So I'm a fourth generation Arizonan, very proud of that. But I am a couple generations removed from production agriculture. So my dad's parents, my dad's dad, his family farmed hay in Tempe and then got out of that. And then my dad's mom's family, they had a beef operation around Wickenburg. But then that generation, my grandparents got out of it. And so I was raised in town in the city, but I did have horses growing up kind of in my later childhood years. Was always very interested in agriculture. Obviously, being around the horses, I was involved in junior rodeo and then college rodeo, 4-H, FFA, things like that. So I was very interested in agriculture from a young age. I think something about providing for animals that provide for people, I think, felt very meaningful to me. But, you know, like a lot of students going into this kind of line of work, they start off wanting to be veterinarian. So I did an undergrad degree at University of Arizona in animal science, thinking I wanted to be a large animal veterinarian. In high school, I had done some ride-alongs with dairy vets, and so had some exposure to the commercial dairy side and grew up in a part of town that was surrounded by dairies. Not so much anymore. It's all houses these days. So I had some exposure to large dairies growing up. And then a couple years into undergrad, realized that the large animal veterinarian path kind of wasn't for me. I think I didn't have the academic dedication to pursue that
Was
path.
it the math?
It wasn't the math, actually. No, I did good enough in college, but I think it was probably my first, chemistry exam or something like that. I got like a high C on it, and I was like, oh no, like this isn't going to fly if I want to go to vet school. So a couple years into undergrad, kind of thought I might pivot a little bit, just started exploring some other career opportunities in agriculture and animal science. And at the time was taking a nutritional biochemistry class, and I think it was called Principles of Animal Feeding or something like that. And so I think you go into it thinking it's going to be very applied, like you feed this much corn and this much soybean to a pig or to a beef cow. But it was very basic nutrition, like biochemistry, what happens to glucose, what happens to amino acids in the body, and things like that. So a lot of students in the class actually didn't like that class because it was not what they expected, but I really enjoyed it. And so I think that kind of turned me on to the idea of nutrition just as a discipline that I was really interested in. And then, to be completely honest, started Googling like cow nutrition jobs because I like nutrition. I like cows. Started Googling cow nutrition jobs. I would read job descriptions and I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Saw that a lot of them required master's or PhD level training. So I, decided to go to grad school, did some internships along the way. We can talk about that. But yeah, that's long story short. Long story long.
Did you finish with your master's or your PhD? I
got a PhD, yeah. So it was funny, like my sophomore year of college, I was like, I don't want to go to vet school. It's too much education, I think. I don't want to go to 4 years of college after college, and then I ended up doing 6 years of additional schooling after my undergrad. So, yeah, so I did a 2-year master's program, and then my PhD took me about 4 years. So.
I think that's kind of how it happens. You get the spark, which I think is what university is supposed to be, right? Like, you're supposed to go and figure out what you really want to do. I also wanted to be a vet. Thought that was really going to be the path, and there was no other way around it. But there was another way around it because I didn't have the vet school kind of funds to do that. So it was kind of the same thing. I took the intro level nutrition class, and it just kind of sparked something, and then kind of just grew from there. But not knocking, because we need a lot of large animal vets. Absolutely. So if that's your path, please continue to do that. There's a lot of options out there as well. But kind of into that animal science field, and we talk about, when you say cow nutritionist, it kind of sounds foreign to a lot of people. But I have a lot of friends who are people nutritionists, and the similarities in the jobs that they're doing, so compared to like what you're doing, is just so striking to me. So can you kind of maybe speak to that a little bit about, we're not really that different from animals, it's just kind of a different application?
Yeah, I think, especially in this day and age, I think there's a lot of conversation around the link between nutrition and health. So I think that's really kind of where this all stems from, and I think it's the same whether you're a human nutritionist or a cattle nutritionist or a pet nutritionist. I mean, you're identifying the important link between the level of nutrition that animals receive and their ultimate health and well-being. Obviously, on the food animal side, not only are you caring about their health, but you care a lot about their food productivity. So on the dairy side, we care a lot about how much milk cows can make, the components of the milk that they make, trying to optimize that, optimize reproductive performance, things like that. Beef cattle and swine, you think a lot about average daily gain and, how can we convert the nutrients they eat into muscle mass for food consumption. So there are some nuances, I think, to animal nutrition, but I think at the end of the day, it's all about optimizing health through nutrition and trying to do that better and utilize science and new technologies to do that better.
It's interesting because when you say nutritionist, I think everybody's mind initially goes to like, oh, we're going to put them on a diet, because that's kind of what it feels like for humans. And especially like I get, ads pushed to me all the time on social media about hire a nutritionist and do this and do that. And we think diet in our minds, right? But it's more of like an athletic performance.
Exactly right, yeah.
So instead of, trying to lose weight or maintain, really looking to fuel them in the right way. Yeah. And so how does that look different from beef to dairy? Like, are there different ingredients? Are there different scenarios that you have to consider?
As far as how cows utilize nutrients to grow or make milk or, supply energy to a growing baby in their body, beef and dairy are very similar, obviously, but the nutrient demands of a dairy cow are much higher than a beef animal. So beef cows, they eat to grow frame size, put on muscle, marbling and things like that for your steaks. But on the dairy side, it's a much more complex system, I feel like, where, as growing animals, you're trying to optimize their growth and body size. And then once they are bred, you're trying to, balance, their frame growth with also, supplying nutrients for the calf growing inside of them. And then they have the calf, so they enter their first lactation. Their nutrient demands increase dramatically as soon as they start making milk. And at each stage of their lactation, they have different nutrient demands. So you're trying to supply different amounts of different nutrients at each stage of lactation. And then, of course, at some point along the line, you breed them again. And so now you have to, not only optimize the milk production side, but make sure that they have the nutrients they need to get pregnant and stay pregnant and supply nutrients for the baby. And then you kind of do it all over again. And most dairy cows, will go through this cycle, of making milk, getting pregnant, having a baby 3 or 4 times, 5 times on a commercial dairy. So it's the individuals that you're feeding on a dairy, you're feeding for a much longer period, and they're going through a lot more dynamic kind of energy demands over the course of their life than a beef cow.
So each dairy is not just making one diet. right? So how many diets are on one dairy on a given day?
There are some smaller dairies around the U.S. or around the world that might feed a single ration, maybe to all their milk cows, and then cows that are not in milk, they feed something else. But most of the dairies that we work with here in Arizona are large commercial operations. They're all family-run businesses, but they do things like large businesses, milking anywhere from, 4,000 cows to 12,000 cows. So a lot going on there, but most of our dairies to the milk cows, you might see, 4 to 6 different milk cow rations. And then when the cows are not in milk, you might have 2 different rations for them. And then for the growing animals, maybe 4 or 5 different rations to kind of meet the various nutrient demands at each stage of the young animal's life. So altogether, I don't know, what is that, 10 or 12 different rations easily. And I know of dairies that feed a lot more rations as well.
And that's really on our farm workers, right? So, if the farmer's milking 4,000 head, they've got a team of people
Absolutely.
Under them, right? So do you work closely with do they have like a nutrition group on their team that handles some of that?
Yeah, so most of these large commercial dairies have feed teams that are responsible for mixing and delivering feed. Some of them would have a manager of those individuals, but we work really closely with all the dairy owners, the managers of the dairy, and most of those managers then would kind of communicate some of our directives down to the feeders that are actually mixing the feed every day. You're probably familiar with this as well, but in nutrition, we always say there's 3 different diets that a cow gets on a dairy. There's the one that the nutritionist formulates. There's the one that the feeders actually deliver, because there's going to be differences there, obviously. And then there's the diet that the cow actually consumes, because cows can sort out the yummy pieces of the feed, and they can go for the corn and some of the yummy byproducts and things like that, and leave maybe some of your forages behind. And so balancing those 3, and one of our main goals is making sure that the diet that we come up with on paper is as close to the same diet that's actually mixed, and that one's as close to what the cow actually consumes herself. So yeah, it's a lot going on. Yeah. It does take a lot of communication, for sure.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about the path that you took kind of to get here, so undergrad, grad school, PhD, were there certain schools that you were looking at that specified in those things?
I think every scientific discipline is probably a little bit different, but at least in animal science, and I think this is true for most animal science disciplines, whether you're talking about nutrition or genetics, reproduction, animal welfare, anything like that. Typically there's, some key individuals, key professors at universities that are doing the most kind of up-to-date, influential research. And most students, whether you're, from the U.S. or from other countries, want to work with those specific individuals. There are universities that are more prominent for nutrition research or dairy research in general, but usually those universities are in that position because they've attracted really good professors. So for the most part, it's about finding a area of research that you're interested in, and then seeing which professors are conducting research in that area, and then trying to work with those specific individuals, regardless of the university they're at,
So you graduated from University of Arizona,
Yes.
your bachelor's,
Yeah.
And then where did you do your master's?
Yeah, my master's was at Kansas State University. I had a mentor at University of Arizona. His name is Bob Collier. He was a professor there for a long time, did a lot of really influential research in heat stress abatement for dairy cows. He was the department head for a long time as well. But at the time, I was involved as an undergrad in his research program. And I came to him one day and I said, Dr. Collier, I really like nutrition. I really like dairy cows. I think I want to go to grad school, because I read these job descriptions that say you need to go to grad school. And he, right there in his office, he said, hey, there's a guy that's, at the time, he was kind of up and coming, really, really bright, influential professor at Kansas State at the time, Barry Bradford. He was studying kind of nutritional immunology and kind of the link between nutrition and health. And right there in his office, he picked up the phone and called Barry. He didn't pick up at the time, but he left him a voicemail and pretty much said, hey, I have this kid that wants to go to grad school. I think you should talk to him. And that's how the door opened for me to go to grad school there. So again, knowing the right people and having those connections, I think, was essential for me. Yeah.
So you went from one wildcat to another.
Yep, 2 wildcats. Yeah, you're exactly right. I had the fortune of, for the most part, all the universities I went to were in different football conferences too. So I never really had to worry about competition there.
You never had to pick.
No,
be
exactly.
A fan of all.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So going through that then, were there internships? Was there an apprenticeship? How did that kind of look as you were beginning to step into the career field from the education side?
Yeah. Going back to knowing the right people, I think my senior year of undergrad, before I started my master's program, I was working at a feed store in Tucson, and the owner of that feed store knew I was interested in dairy nutrition, and she said, hey, I have a guy you should meet. He owns a nutrition consulting company in Arizona for dairies. So I had breakfast with him one morning. I ended up interning with him the summer between my undergrad and starting my master's. And then, I don't know, however many years later that is, that's who I'm working for today. So he's my boss now, and I work with this company. So I did an internship with him, working with some of the customers that we have today here in Arizona. And then in between my master's and PhD, I also did a internship in the feed industry. Got to travel around Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Wisconsin, doing some kind of value-added like feed audits on dairies. So yeah, there are internship opportunities out there. And I would say that's one of the things that, especially as employers are looking for new hires who may not, have 10 years of industry experience, I think seeing students that have taken advantage of internship opportunities is huge. I think one of the things that maybe in hindsight, I wish I would have done. I wish I would have just worked on a dairy for a summer. I kind of did, the consulting internship and then the feed industry internship, and those were great experiences for me. But there's so much to learn about how dairies operate that I could have, I think, had a lot stronger understanding of had I just worked, 3 months at one of our customers' dairies here in Arizona. So I would definitely recommend students, if they're interested in the dairy industry, just work on a dairy, find dairies that do internships. And, there's larger dairies across the country that do have pretty extensive internship programs. And I would, especially getting out of the region that you're kind of used to, would be a recommendation I'd have as well.
Yeah. And if you didn't know, the dairy industry varies so much across the country. The dairies that we have here in Arizona look nothing like the dairies in the Midwest or the East Coast, and size being just one of those factors. Yeah. So you talked about, it's kind of who you know, right? And it's getting out and meeting people and kind of cultivating those opportunities for yourself. And that's something that Farm Bureau tries to provide for some of our younger, like our YFNR members. So were you a member of any other organizations, or was that something that you think helped you or would have helped if it wasn't?
I was involved in 4-H in high school, and I think, 4-H provided me with some scholarships going into my undergrad. But as far as like professional, organizations or anything like that, once I started grad school, there's some dairy science organizations that I had joined. But yeah, prior to that, as far as like, career development, things like that, I think, 4-H obviously played a role for me, but that was kind of it.
Yeah. It's kind of putting yourself out there and taking that opportunity to be engaged in whatever it is that, you're working towards. So what I see a lot from a lot of our young farmers and ranchers membership and our students, especially like our collegiate level, they're really engaged in what we're doing at Farm Bureau and how they can be involved. And from that, they're attending events, they're taking opportunities that are presented to them, and they're able to meet people and build a network and do that at a young age. I wish I would have known that when I was in school. Yeah. And taking those opportunities, I think, will set them up for better success sooner, right? Like I took kind of a winding path to get to the career that I got to, and I networked along the way, but I didn't really know why it was important or how to do it effectively. Right. So I think that is just so interesting to me, and I love to see the young people just really passionate and engaged about, what they want to do and figuring out maybe what their path looks like a lot sooner than some people.
Right. We work in a really small, relatively small industry. I'm sure people talk about that all the time. When I was in grad school, I had a professor say, the students that you're going to grad school with, if they stay in the dairy industry, you'll see them for the rest of your life. And that's the kind of industry we work in, which I think is a really, really valuable thing, but it reiterates the importance of your network and relationships. And I think students who are not afraid to take some chances and shake hands and meet people. I made a business card for myself when I was an undergrad, that I would hand out at different things, just like, kind of as a way to separate myself from other students and kind of help employers and things like that remember who I was. But I mean, making business cards, shaking hands. LinkedIn is really valuable as well. I think I've done a lot of LinkedIn stalking of people and put a face to the name, figure out what their background is, who they work for. And then if you see them at a meeting or an event, it feels like you already kind of know a little bit about them. So I think it gives you more confidence to introduce yourself. I did go to a few Agriculture Future of America events when I was an undergrad. That was beneficial as well. Just kind of, again, getting me outside of my comfort zone, helping me interact with students outside of Arizona, those kind of things, and not being afraid to take those chances, I think is really valuable.
I think in a world where when you submit a resume, you don't know if it's a person or a computer that's going to read it, having those connections, like writing your resume, writing your cover letter, and having that established is one piece of it. Yeah. But having those connections, those personal connections, absolutely, I think is really critical, especially when we think about agriculture. Mm-hmm. No matter what sector of ag I've been in, it's always been critical to have that network and make those face-to-face interactions with people, strike up those conversations and ask the questions. Yeah. I always want to say, there are no dumb questions because you don't know what you don't know. And if you want to know something, ask the experts, right?
I think there's a lot to be said for having the humility to admit that you have a lot to learn. And I think, that's a great icebreaker when you're meeting more experienced people is like, hey, I have a lot to learn. I'm really interested in this, but I don't know a lot, and I'm eager to learn. And I think that hunger and desire to learn, I think, really is well respected, and I think that would, give you a lot of great connections. One of the other things I just remembered that I did this throughout my undergrad and grad school as well, but every time I'd meet someone at a conference from a company, because when you go to grad school, you kind of have two career paths. You can go work in the industry, or you can go back and work in academia. And I was always very industry focused. So, but anytime I would meet somebody at a conference who worked for a company and I, shook their hand, got a business card, I would write their name down. So I had this running list of companies and then individuals from each of those companies that I had met. So then when I started seeing job postings being posted, if I saw a job posting for company A, I would go back and look at my list and say, there's company A, here's this person I met from company A. Is this person hiring for that position? Maybe not necessarily, they work there, but they know who is hiring for that position, or they know the manager or the CEO of the business. And so then I would reach out to a specific person rather than just submit my resume and cover letter to some generic, filing bin, virtual filing bin. I would, reach out to a specific person, whether it's a salesperson or a marketing person, research person, say, hey, I saw this position. I'm really interested. Would you mind forwarding my information along to the hiring manager? So then that way I was able to have some conversations, whether it's email or phone call with the actual hiring managers well before I ever submitted the resume and cover letter. So that way, when I did do that, when I did take that step, they were kind of already looking out for me and my name, which was really beneficial. So whether you're in undergrad or grad school looking for jobs, regardless of what industry you're in, I feel like if you meet individuals who work for companies that you might be interested in working for one day, file those names. And then as you see job postings, reach out to those individuals rather than just submitting your resume kind of anonymously.
That's genius, I think. Because it feels so daunting, especially if you're in the crunch time and it's getting close to graduation and you're really looking for a job. And at that point you're like, I'll just take anything. But you don't want to take something and have it be, maybe not the right fit. Right. But when you've submitted 20, 30, maybe 40 applications and maybe you don't hear anything back, or it can be really disheartening. Right. But if there is a way to make those connections, and that's kind of what I always stress, we've got a group of 8 of our YFNR collegiates who are going to Portland, Oregon next month in March for the annual YFNR convention. So that's people 18 to 35 from across the nation, along with companies and sponsors and that kind of thing. But it's a leadership opportunity. Yeah. And those individuals that are going, that we are happy and excited to sponsor them to go, they've been really critical and engaged in what we're doing here in Maricopa County and making sure that, they're involved. And if they're asked to maybe volunteer for something, that they're there and really participating. And I'm excited for them to go and have that experience and be able to kind of take the most away from it that they can. And that's my biggest point to them is like, make sure that you are talking to people. Like, it's a lot of fun, to meet your peers from across the country and make connections and do that. And that's very important too. But there's a lot of knowledge that is going to be there. And if something really hits you, like, don't be afraid. Just go up and shake their hand and strike up that conversation with them. And you never know where it can lead.
Especially in this day and age where a lot more communication is happening virtually, I think, especially young people that have the courage to look somebody in the eye and shake their hand in person, I think it does set you apart. And then kind of the other thing along those same lines, anytime I would meet somebody at a conference, if I got their contact information, usually an email, I would always send a follow-up email, just like, hey, great to meet you, look forward to staying in touch, something super simple like that. But I think those kind of things, not a lot of students are doing. And so I think it keeps people on your mind, and you're kind of on their short list of, potential job candidates or anything like that. So that was another piece of advice I had.
Yeah, I think when you think about it being a little bit scary, like, I'm not really a social extrovert. So some of that stuff, it's just, man, I have to work myself up to do it sometimes. But when you kind of take that step and do that scary thing, that's what really starts setting you apart from other people in your field, other candidates.
And it's good practice because, I still do that today in my job. There's dairy farmers that we don't work with that we would love to work with, not only here in Arizona, but in other states as well. And, I have to do this scary thing and, call somebody up or stop by their dairy and shake their hand. And so those skills you develop kind of in a much safer environment, you take with you in future roles. So
very transferable. Yeah. As someone who left grad school and was a feed salesman at, 22 or 3 or however old I was, driving up on a farm that you've never been to and hopping out of the truck and just saying, hey, my name's Nicole and I'm here. Like, that is one of the scariest things.
Yeah, I still have to kind of psych myself up a little bit before I go in, and then once the conversation's over, I'm like, my adrenaline's pumping. I'm like, okay, just a week or so ago, I called a list of dairymen outside of the state of Arizona, and, I've reached out to them before, but haven't had a lot of luck. But anyway, when I got through with all those 10 or 12 phone calls, most of the time I just left voicemails, but you're like amped up, I had adrenaline pumping. I was like, oh man, that was scary stuff. But that's kind of the name of the game. That's what you have to do. And I think in this part of the country too, the dairies are big. It's a lot harder to pull onto a dairy, knock on the door, and interact immediately with a decision maker. Oftentimes you might meet a manager, or maybe he's just the manager of that specific milking shift or feeding shift, or maybe there's a front desk person that you talk to. Other parts of the country, it's a lot easier to kind of open the door and all of a sudden you're talking with an owner or an owner's son or something like that. So different regions, it takes a little more effort to find that decision maker, but it's hard nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah. For reference, for those that don't know, so the average herd size for a dairy in Arizona is 3,500. And so that really makes a big difference where, it might just be one family, one husband, wife, and their kids that are running this whole operation. So even then, I think those relationships and those interactions are so important, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter the size of the operation. Right. In agriculture, it's all about trust and relationships. Absolutely. And I think that fits in with no matter what industry you're looking at. If you can sit down and have coffee or take somebody to lunch and just sit down and have a face-to-face conversation with them, that's always been a more impactful situation than an email or even a phone call, as scary as they may be.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think I look at what I do, and I think anybody that's kind of in a consulting role, whether you're a veterinarian or agronomist or, I don't know, genetics or anything like that, anyone that's in a consulting role obviously wants to help improve the bottom line of that operation. But I think at the end of the day, you're working for that family that owns that operation. You care about the legacy they can leave behind for their kids and their family. So you want them to be successful because you want them to be around for a long time and influence the local industry in a positive way. And so it's a lot more than just being better than your competition and making a lot of money. It's about, impacting the family that you're working with. And whether that's a 10,000 cow dairy or a 1,000 cow dairy or 100 cow dairy, as a consultant, you are supporting a family. So that's a pretty meaningful thing to me.
Absolutely. And so this is something fun, and we kind of went through it. The last guest on our Careers in Ag series was an agricultural lender. and it's not just him sitting in an office and a computer, right? So what does kind of the average day look like as a dairy nutritionist?
Most of our really in-depth meetings with our clients where we look at, health records, performance records, we look at all the feed, we make ration changes. Those kind of more in-depth, detailed meetings happen, once a month, maybe twice a month with our clients. So outside of those kind of intense meetings, it's a lot of feed sampling, a lot of monitoring inventory of different ingredients, going on farms, driving some pens of cows, walking some pens of cows, checking in with different individuals at different levels of management on the dairy. I think the more insight we can have into what's actually happening at the ground level on the dairy, so talking to the guys that are managing the hospital pen, talk to the feeders, they're the ones that actually know what's going on, how things are flowing. So a lot of kind of check in with individuals like that. The sampling, I said, we sample a lot of different feed ingredients in preparation for kind of our monthly meetings, because we always want to, whenever we reformulate rations or optimize how those rations are put together, we want to do it with the right characteristics of those different ingredients. It's a combination of a lot of driving, getting on farms, and then when I'm at home, I always have plenty of office work to do. A lot of it has to do with staying up to date on dairy research, nutrition research. There's some really good podcasts out there related to dairy nutrition and management. So I listen to podcasts, and then there's some value added things we offer for our clients as far as, maybe evaluating the nutritional value of different ingredients, or I've been looking at kind of the economics behind a specific forage harvesting practice and trying to determine for producers in Arizona, if they change how they harvest a specific forage, is there an economic return to that? So a lot of those kind of side projects I work on at home as well.
That's a lot of different types of things that go into this job. And it's so interesting to me. I think a lot of people don't maybe understand all the things that actually affect what you do. Yeah. And kind of on that note, when we think about the ingredients that are going into these diets, are you affected at all by, say, tariffs or market changes or, anything that's happening kind of like that on a federal level?
Yeah, absolutely. Farmers in general, regardless of whether you're farming, lettuce or making milk or whatever, that job is not for the faint of heart. And I think a lot of all those farmers put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into an occupation that, the profitability of which they have very little control over. So on the dairy side, these guys put in a lot of time and money and energy into, having a herd of healthy, productive cows, but they are victims of feed prices and milk prices. Sometimes milk prices are high and feed prices are low, in which case the dairy farmer makes a good living. It's rare when those things are happening at the same time. So, to put all this effort in only to have feed prices be incredibly high, makes their margins very thin, or vice versa. Putting all this effort in, your cows are making a lot of milk, but the markets are not paying for milk right now, or not paying for milk fat. It makes it really hard to be profitable. So, these are some of the hardest working individuals in the world, but there's a lot that's tied to their success that's out of their control. So I have so much respect for farmers in general, because they all have to deal with that in some respect.
Yeah. I think when you look at a gallon of milk in the store and it's, maybe $3, and you think about how much of that the farmer actually gets, it's such a tiny fraction. Right. But there's a lot that goes into it, to get it from the cow to the shelf. Yeah. And I think, just kind of understanding a lot of the different pieces that go into it, like your job as a nutritionist. Yeah. You're one of many in a team that a dairy farmer has, from their nutrition team to vet team to, their ingredients team. There's so much that goes into it, and I think it's been really great to hear a lot about maybe a career that people don't really know about.
Yeah. I was pretty unaware that this career existed, when I was a freshman or sophomore at U of A, but really happy that I found it. So,
do you think somebody without any background in agriculture at all can step into something like this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I know of, a few examples of pretty prominent veterinarians or nutritionists that were kind of raised in town, had very little access to dairy, that, in college got some exposure and realized the real value to working in a role like that. And I think if you're, like I said, if you're willing to learn and, put the effort in and meet people and put yourself out there, I think, anybody can be successful regardless of your background. Obviously, having a background, being raised on a dairy gives you right off the bat a lot more kind of credibility and maybe allows you to connect and understand the farmer a little easier. But, internships and things like that can certainly help bridge that gap.
Well, we always say, 1.7% of Americans are farmers or ranchers, right? But over 10% of people are involved in agriculture in some way with their career. So welcome to the 8%, and thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah, happy to be here.
One last question.
Yes.
Is it dairy milk that's in that Starbucks cup?
Absolutely. It sure is. I wouldn't touch any almond juice. So.
Well, I really appreciate you being here today. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time. I know your hectic schedule, but we really appreciate it, and thanks for sharing about it.
Yeah, I would do it again. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Arizona Agriculture Connection, and catch us next week for an updated Ag Report. Thank you for tuning in today, and remember, Farm Bureau has a place for you. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your friends on socials. You can also visit our website, maricopacountyfb.org, for more information and to submit a topic you want to learn about. Remember to tune in every Wednesday wherever you listen to podcasts. A huge thank you to Paloma Ready Mixing Materials for supporting our agriculture producers and this podcast. Maricopa County Farm Bureau, bringing you the stories of real families, real farms, and real food. I'm Nicole Clements, signing off. Catch you next week.